April 14th, 1944. 2:10 hours. Northern Solomon Islands. The sea is black glass, broken only by the low pulse of distant surf and the soft hiss of wind pushing across the water. Moonlight slips through scattered clouds, reflecting off something that shouldn't be there long. Faint lines stretching across the waves like the skeletons of ships. Lieutenant Commander Harold Brindley lifts his binoculars again, refusing to trust the first glimpse, because what he sees makes no sense. 200 shapes, all drifting in formation, silent, unlit. A convoy or what looks like one stretching nearly a mile across the dark Pacific. But there are no engine sounds, no silhouettes of superstructures, no signal lights. Just rows of ghostly outlines bobbing with the tide. From the deck of USS McKean, APD-5, the wind smells of salt, diesel, and something else, unease. Brindley lowers the binoculars, whispering to the officer beside him. Those can't be ships, yet the formations are perfect. Columns aligned like merchantmen steaming through hostile waters, spacing so precise it could only be intentional. Even the gaps resemble the typical intervals between escort vessels. You can almost feel the confusion tightening across the deck as sailors gather along the rails. Some murmur about Japanese night convoys. Others swear they see the outline of a destroyer leading the line. But the ocean tells a different story. The convoy moves too freely with the waves, too lightly, too loosely. These shapes aren't displacing water, a bosun mutters. They're loading. Brindley feels it too. Something wrong, something off, something almost eerie. Because if these aren't ships, then what are they? And if they are ships, how are they completely silent? A quarter moon drifts from behind a cloud, spilling pale silver across the water. And finally, the truth begins to take shape. Not holes, not bows, not smokestacks. Drums. Hundreds of them. Oil drums. Lashed together in long lines, forming the illusion of a full-sized Allied convoy creeping through enemy waters. Ghost convoy. Brindley exhales as the realization hits. Someone, somewhere, engineered this. 200 floating decoys placed in perfect geometric order, each rocking slightly as the swells roll under them. But why here? Why now? Who would go to such lengths to fake an entire fleet? Before he can answer, the radio operator rushes across the deck, breathless. Sir, Japanese aerial scouts spotted this formation an hour ago. Brindley turns sharply, and the operator swallows. They reported a large Allied convoy approaching Bougainville. A beat of silence follows. Meaning the Japanese think this ghost fleet is real? Meaning their response is already in motion? Meaning the night is about to ignite? Brindley grips the rail, feeling the cold bite of steel. What exactly did the Japanese do? He asks quietly. The radio man looks him in the eye. They've scrambled everything. Strike aircraft, torpedo bombers, fast attack boats. Another gust of wind sweeps across the deck, making the empty drums creak and knock softly together, a sound almost like murmuring voices. Brindley's jaw tightens. A fake convoy is about to trigger a very real battle, and the Allied ships in the region, the real ones, have no idea what's coming. The moment the news settles over the deck, the night seems to grow colder. A fake convoy, enemy aircraft inbound, real Allied vessels unaware they're walking into a storm meant for ghosts. Lieutenant Commander Brindley forces himself to breathe steadily as he steps back toward the chart room. Inside, the dim red lamps cast long shadows over the navigation table, where the map of the Northern Solomons lies pinned under metal weights. The lines of islands, reefs, and narrow passages snake across the paper like scars. But now there's something new, a set of small pencil circles marking the decoy line. 200 drums arranged into 5 parallel strings, each nearly 900 yards long, anchored with sandbags and knotted rope. A makeshift fleet on the open ocean. And in the corner of the chart, almost hidden under the edge of a ruler, sits a scribbled note. Operation Spectre Line, Bougainville. Brindley recognizes the handwriting. Commander Robert Delaney, U.S. Navy Intelligence. A man both respected and feared, brilliant at deception. Relentless in execution, and known for ideas so unorthodox they rarely survived a briefing. Yet somehow this one had. You're wondering how these barrels got out here? A voice murmurs from the doorway. Brindley turns. Captain Marion O'Donnell, the senior intelligence officer aboard the McKean, steps into the room. A slender woman with sharp eyes and a mind always 3 moves ahead. She gestures toward the penciled lines on the chart. That's Delaney's doing. His team dropped them 2 nights ago. Brindley blinks. 200 barrels? In formation? In enemy waters? Expression is unreadable. They used 3 PT boats. Rand blacked out. Every barrel was pre-linked in groups of 20. All they had to do was tow them out here and anchor them. The Japanese patrols never saw a thing. Brindley studies the map again. Now the illusion makes sense. Long lines. Consistent spacing. Enough mass to appear as ships on low-altitude reconnaissance photographs. Enough shape to trick a distant lookout searching for silhouettes. But why, he asks quietly. Why create a phantom convoy? O'Donnell leans over the table, tapping a slender finger on Bougainville. Because the Japanese have been hammering our real supply runs. Every time we push fuel or ammunition to the Marines at Empress Augusta Bay, we lose ships. Last week they sank USS John Penn. Before that, the Macaulay. We needed a way to draw enemy attention somewhere else. She looks up, and tonight. It worked. Brindley feels the weight of it. A risky plan meant to save lives. But now, it threatens to start something worse. If the Japanese send their full strike force against the Ghost Convoy, they'll hit nothing but drifting drums. But when they don't find ships where they expect them, they'll spread out, searching, probing, hunting, and eventually they'll stumble onto the real convoy scheduled to run through the channel at dawn. Brindley's gut tightens. How soon until they're overhead? As early as 20 minutes, O'Donnell replies. Torpedo bombers are already en route from the shortlands. A low rumble of thunder rolls across the distance. Or is it something else? The McKean's engines hum beneath their feet as the ship pivots slightly with the changing wind. Outside, the sea groans, ropes creaking against bollards as the Ghost Convoy drifts in the swell. The eerie silence is broken only by occasional metallic knocks where drums bump softly into each other like whispered warnings. O'Donnell folds her arms. Delaney believed the Japanese would attack the drums and waste their munitions. He didn't anticipate their reconnaissance pilots would report a convoy so large that Tokyo would panic. Brindley lifts his gaze. How large did they think it was? 5 transports, 3 destroyers, possibly a cruiser escort. Brindley exhales. That is no small threat. That is a fleet worth destroying. And the Japanese will stop at nothing to do so. A petty officer bursts through the doorway, breathless. Ma'am, sir, radar just picked up inbound contacts, multiple. Speed indicates twin-engine bombers. Brindley doesn't need to ask how many, but the petty officer answers anyway. At least 26. The deck vibrates as general quarters echoes through the ship. Klaxons wail. Boots thunder across steel. Gun crews rush to their stations, slamming hatches, loading belts, adjusting sights. O'Donnell looks out the porthole toward the Ghost Convoy, still drifting in perfect lines. They're coming straight for the decoys, she says. Brindley's throat tightens, and when they realize the convoy isn't real, O'Donnell turns to him. Will be the closest thing they can shoot. Something is coming through the clouds, something that will change the night entirely. The first engines appear before the bombers themselves do a low, rolling hum, drifting over the black water like a warning from another world. You can almost feel the vibration in your chest, a distant pulse growing stronger by the second. On the deck of the McKean, sailors tighten their grips on cold steel gun mounts. The air tastes of brine and tension. Every man knows what's coming, even if no one can see it yet. Lieutenant Commander Brindley steps onto the starboard catwalk, binoculars raised, scanning the cloud cover. The sky looks bruised, patches of moonlight breaking through swirling gray. Then a flash, not lightning, something metallic, catching the moon. Contacts bearing 045. A lookout shouts. The sky tears open. One by one, the silhouettes drop out of the clouds. Mitsubishi G4M, Betty bombers, all their long, narrow wings cutting through the night air. Searchlights flickering on beneath them as they begin their approach. 26 aircraft, moving in disciplined formation, and headed straight for the Ghost Convoy. The first words whispered along the deck aren't curses. They're disbelief. They think it's real. Down below, the strange, silent lines of floating drums drift in the moonlight like ships in a dream. The bombers tighten their wedge formation, engines howling as they angle downward, preparing for a torpedo run. Brindley's heart pounds. If they drop their fish, they'll waste them on empty barrels. But if they realize the truth too soon— "Hold fire!" the gunnery officer shouts. "Let them commit." Every second feels stretched thin, a taut wire ready to snap. The McKean remains dark, silent, nearly invisible, a shadow on the water. The Bettys descend to wavetop height, the spray from their slipstreams carving fleeting silver streaks across the sea. Then it happens. A bomber banks left, its searchlight sweeping across the first barrel line. The beam jumps from drum to drum, momentary flashes of curved metal, ropes, anchor lines, not hull plating, not steel decks, not a convoy, just barrels. The light flickers once, sputters, then snaps back on as if the crewman is desperately adjusting it. Brindley sees it in the movement, the hesitation, the confusion, the realization, and then the Japanese formation falters. 2 aircraft wobble in the line. A third pulls up slightly. It's the radio chatter, though unheard, might as well be screaming across the sky. "Sir, they know," a sailor whispers beside Brindley. "They do, but the Bettys are already descending. Their torpedoes already armed, their attack run already committed." In panic, real panic spreads through the Japanese formation like fire. A bomber suddenly jerks upward, trying to break off. Another overcorrects, wingtip nearly skimming the water. A third veers too sharply and clips the edge of another aircraft's slipstream, nearly stalling. Brindley feels a jolt of horror. They're going to crash into each other. O'Donnell appears at his shoulder, eyes locked on the scene unraveling above them. "No," she says softly. "They're going to regroup. And when they do, they won't waste their munitions on barrels. Meaning one thing. They'll search for the nearest real ship."
Damn.
And the McKean is the brightest radar signature for 30 nautical miles. As if on cue, one bomber breaks formation entirely, nose swinging toward the McKean. Another follows, then a third.
Oh.
The gunnery officer doesn't hesitate. "Open fire." The night erupts. Twin 40mm Bofors guns explode into life, their heavy thumping beating against the deck like artillery. Tracer rounds streak upward, orange arcs slicing the darkness. The ship shudders from the recoil, hot brass raining down on the crew's boots. A Betty peels away under the sudden wall of fire, but another presses closer, aiming directly for the bridge. Brindley grips the railing as the bomber fills his vision, the glass nose. The engine glow, the spinning propellers biting the night. It's coming too fast. Hit him, hit him. A burst of 20mm fire tears into the bomber's starboard wing. Flames erupt instantly, licking across the fuselage. The aircraft rolls, plunging toward the sea, slamming into the water with a blinding orange flash. Cheers erupt, brief, ragged, desperate, but they die instantly as another bomber takes its place, then another and another. The McKean is no longer an observer. She is the target. The guns hammer the night again, sending shockwaves through the ship. Powder smoke fills the air, a harsh bite in the throat. Shell casings clatter and bounce across the deck. Orders are yelled in rapid bursts as spotters track incoming aircraft. 2 more inbound, bearing 180, torp to torpedo in the water. The words tear through the night like an electric shock. Brindley snaps toward the port side, searching the black water. Then he sees it, a faint pale wake cutting toward the ship, the torpedo, hard to starboard. Someone screams. The helmsman throws the wheel. The ship groans, tilting as it begins a tight turn. Sailors grab for railings. Spotlight flicks on, illuminating nothing but the violent shimmer of water. The torpedo streaks past the bow, missing by no more than 15 feet. A collective breath shudders through the deck. But there's no relief, because this was only the first wave. Above them, the remaining bombers circle like predatory birds. Regrouping after a failed strike, now fully aware of the deception below. They know the ghost convoy is fake. And they know exactly where the real ship is. O'Donnell steps closer, voice barely audible over the wind. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Brindley swallows hard. What's their next move? O'Donnell doesn't look away from the sky. I'll bring in the fast attack boats. Brindley's blood runs cold. Japanese torpedo boats, small, fast, deadly, operating from the Shortland's night hunters. The bombers peel away into the clouds, their silhouettes dissolving one by one until nothing remains but the smell of burned aviation fuel drifting across the sea. The sky is quiet again, too quiet, and that silence feels heavier than the attack itself. Below, the water churns softly around the McKean as the ship completes her evasive turn. Steam hisses from the funnels. The deck is littered with spent casings glinting faintly in the moonlight. Gun crews reload in grim silence, their gloves slick with oil and sweat. Lieutenant Commander Brindley wipes soot from his cheek and glances toward the drifting ghost convoy. The barrels still bob placidly in the swell, innocently reflecting moonlight as though they had indeed just drawn a Japanese strike force out of the sky. Sailors stare at them in disbelief, as if those floating drums are part miracle, part curse. Then a voice crackles over the loudspeaker. Bridge to all stations. Enemy surface craft detected to the southwest. Speed. Hi. Brindley's breath catches. They're here, he murmurs. Captain O'Donnell steps up beside him, her coat whipping in the rising wind. Japanese fast attack boats, she confirms. Probably Fubuki-class derivatives, or smaller Shinyo units. 10 to 12 vessels based on radar echo length. Small silhouettes begin to take form on the horizon. Black shapes, skimming across the surface, illuminated only when the moon breaks free of passing clouds. You can almost hear them before you see them. Engines snarling in the dark, sharp holes carving white scars into the water. These aren't lumbering ships, they're predators. In the Solomon Islands, the Japanese called them taktiya, special attack boats. Some carried depth charges. Others packed dual torpedoes. All were built for one purpose: ambush. And tonight they believe they've found their prey. Brindley feels his pulse drum in his neck. Gunnery, he says into the intercom. Be ready. These boats will hit fast, aye, sir. The moon slips behind another cloud, and the shapes disappear again, as if the ocean swallowed them whole. Seconds stretch. Then the first muzzle flash blossoms across the water. A bright, sharp wink of orange. Incoming fire, take cover. Someone roars. Japanese 13mm round cracks against the McKean's aft railing, showering sparks. Another snaps overhead, followed by the distant tat-tat-tat of machine gun bursts. The McKean answers instantly. The portside 20mm Oerlikon erupts, spitting fire into the night. Tracers leap across the black water, colliding with a speeding silhouette. The enemy boat zigzags wildly, its wake glowing white under the streaking rounds. Gun crews shout over the roar. Range closing, another on the starboard quarter. A second Japanese boat appears. Racing alongside the ghost convoy, weaving between the barrel lines, confusing the gunners for a split second, it uses the decoys as cover. Shift fire. Ship at 90 degrees. The Oerlikon swings, barrels glowing faintly red from the heat. Shells hammer through the boat's thin hull, sparks jump, wood splinters. Then a sudden bloom of flame as its fuel ignites. The craft twists upward, bow pointing briefly at the sky before collapsing into the sea with a violent hiss. But there are more. Many more. 10 boats fan out like wolves circling a wounded stag, pushing their engines to near bursting. Their wakes carve frantic white lines across the black water, converging toward the McKean. One breaks formation early, accelerating hard to hard, torpedo boat making a run. Brindley sees it clearly now. The small open cabin, the long torpedo slung beneath the hull, the 2 crewmen crouched low. It's moving incredibly fast. Bring him down. The starboard 40mm Bofors fires in a rhythmic thunder, each round punching into the dark. The sea erupts around the attacker in tall plumes, but the boat keeps coming, unshaken. They mean to ram, O'Donnell says quietly. Brindley feels his stomach knot. Brace. The boat is less than 300 yards out when a single, perfectly placed 40mm round slams into its engine compartment. The boat erupts into a fireball, splitting open like a crushed tin can as flaming debris sprays across the waves. A cheer rises, but it dies instantly. Another torpedo boat has slipped behind one of the barrel lines. Where did he go? Lost him? The searchlight swings wildly. Then someone shouts, "Wake in the water!" Torpedo port's side. Brindley sees the thin silver trail cutting toward the ship. It's close, too close, hard to port. Engines full. The deck tilts sharply as the helmsman executes the evasive maneuver. The ship's bow swings wide, slicing through the ghost convoy itself. Drums thump and scrape against the hull as they're torn from their moorings. The torpedo races past the stern, missing by a hair's breadth. But the maneuver has consequences. The McKean now sits broadside to the incoming attack boats. Wide target, slowed turn, exposed profile. Damn, Brindley mutters. They wanted this angle. O'Donnell's voice is tight. They planned for it. The enemy formation begins tightening into a long, narrow line, preparing for a coordinated torpedo spread. One salvo could cripple the entire ship. Brindley looks up at the sky, hoping for an American fighter patrol, a stray P-38, anything. But the sky is empty. They're alone. He steadies himself. Signal the engine room, he orders. We need flank speed. And bring the forward battery to bear. The intercom crackles. Aye, sir. As the orders relay through the ship, Brindley feels a chill deeper than the wind. The ghost convoy has done its job, drawing the enemy into the open. But now the illusion has turned on its maker. The Japanese know the barrels are fake. They know the McKean is real. They're coming with everything they have. The bow rises on a swell, water crashing along the hull. Below deck, alarms ring. Above deck, sailors reload with trembling hands. Across the water, the enemy torpedo line steadies itself. This moment, this breath is the razor edge between life and destruction. And just then, over the roar of the sea, a faint new sound emerges. A second engine, a deeper one. Coming from the west, Brindley's eyes widen. No, it can't be, but it is. Something large is approaching fast. The distant engine note grows louder, deeper, heavier, unmistakably larger than the snarling Japanese attack boats. Sailors freeze mid-reload. Gunners pause with shells halfway into their feed trays. Even the roar of the sea seems too quiet, as if the water itself is listening. Lieutenant Commander Brindley turns toward the western horizon, breath held tight in his chest. Through a break in the clouds, a shadow emerges, long, dark, moving fast across the choppy water. A ship, a big ship. At first, its silhouette is only a blur, obscured by distance and mist. But as it cuts through the moonlight, the shape sharpens, a tall bow-angled superstructure, and the unmistakable outline of triple torpedo tubes along the deck. Brindley's heart slams against his ribs. A destroyer. But something's wrong. The configuration is off. The proportions aren't American. Aunt O'Donnell steps forward, squinting through the gloom. That isn't one of ours, she whispers. The realization hits immediately like cold water down the spine. A Japanese destroyer, a full-sized escort warship, operating in the same waters as the small attack boats. Brindley grips the railing, knuckles white. They sent a hunter to finish what the boat started. The destroyer's bow wave gleams in the moonlight. Its engines pound the night air in a steady, disciplined rhythm, not frantic like the torpedo boats, but confident, predatory. It knows it holds the advantage. You can almost feel the weight of its guns turning, O'Donnell murmurs. Fubuki class, or Kagero class. Either way, that's a killer. Her voice is tight, strained. Because even one of those destroyers carries enough torpedoes to break a cruiser in half. And the McKean is a lightly armed APD fast. Yes, but thin-skinned. Never designed for this. Range, Brindley asks hoarsely. 8,000 yards in closing. The Japanese torpedo boats change. Formation instantly at the arrival of their larger ally. Like wolves circling back to the Alpha, they spread into a V-line behind the destroyer, creating a layered attack formation, perfectly suited for a kill run. The destroyer flashes a signal lamp quick, precise bursts of light. The small boats respond with their own. Brindley recognizes the pattern. Coordinated torpedo spread, a killing net. His stomach twists. Gunnery, he barks into the intercom. Prepare for rapid fire. Prioritize small craft. Do not let them get closer. Gun crews scramble. Shell belts slam into place. The entire ship vibrates with renewed urgency. Below deck, damage control teams brace for impact they know is likely coming. Above deck, sailors stare at the approaching destroyer with a fear that has no name. The Japanese formation picks up speed. Then, a flare rises from the enemy destroyer, arcing upward before sputtering into a bright red glow. It hangs in the air like a crimson omen, signal, and everything happens at once. Torpedo run. someone screams. 3 attack boats peel out of the V formation, engines screaming as they surge forward. Their wakes blaze white across the black water. "Open fire!" Brindley roars. The McKean's forward 40mm guns unleash everything they have, thunderous blasts punching into the night, tracers ripping toward the incoming boats. One boat erupts in flames instantly, breaking apart as its own torpedoes detonate. But the other 2 keep racing forward, weaving through geysers of exploding water. 2 incoming on starboard, another boat closing on port. The McKean begins a high-speed zigzag, her engines howling as she tries to spoil the torpedo angles. Crewmen grip railings as the deck tilts, spray whipping across their faces. Brindley watches the destroyer. It hasn't fired yet. It's waiting. Its torpedoes are longer ranged, deadly at 10,000 yards. It wants the McKean to turn broadside, to panic, to show its flank. Then it will strike. But Brindley knows this too. He forces calm into his voice. He says quietly, "Do not turn broadside. Not for anything." "Aye, sir." The ship shudders as another salvo of 20mm fire roars overhead. The closest Japanese boat takes a hit, skidding wildly before cartwheeling into the sea. But one remains. The last boat tears through the waves, its entire hull vibrating with speed. 200 yards, 100 brace, someone yells. Brindley grips the cold railing, breath frozen in his chest. The boat swings to port, the perfect torpedo angle. It happens fast. A thump, a splash. A pale, narrow wake streaking toward the McKean. Torpedo in the water. The helmsman throws the wheel. The ship groans in protest. Sailors crash into bulkheads. A spotlight whips across the sea. And the torpedo passes by the bow, so close you could almost reach out and touch it. Cheers erupt, exhausted, adrenaline-soaked, triumphant. But Brindley doesn't join them, because the destroyer is still closing. Now its guns are turning. Slowly, deliberately. O'Donnell sees it too. He's lining up for a broadside. Her voice trails off. Because suddenly, impossibly, another engine note echoes across the water. Not Japanese, not a boat, not a destroyer. A deep, throaty diesel rumble. American. Brindley's eyes snap toward the southern horizon. And there, emerging from the darkness, is a shape he never expected to see. A PT boat, one of theirs, running at full speed, and behind it more. Whole squadron. Racing toward the battle like avenging angels. The first report hit the Japanese operations tent like a slap. A young petty officer burst through the flaps, nearly knocking over a lantern as he bowed, breathless. "Sir, enemy transports. Multiple columns moving east, at least 4, maybe 5 convoys." Lieutenant Commander Masaru Ishimoto looked up from his chart. Convoys. At this hour, in these waters, he walked outside. The sun had finally climbed above the horizon, flattening the sea into a shimmering bronze sheet. Spray hissed against volcanic rock, and there far out, barely visible long, uneven silhouettes drifted in broken lines. Too many lines, too many shapes. His binoculars trembled. They looked like transports, low in the water, bulky, numerous. Hundreds of them. Chill slid between his shoulder blades. "Get me confirmation," he muttered. Now, minutes later, another pair of scouts returned to men in dripping uniforms, panting as if they'd sprinted across the island. "Sir, we saw them from the North Ridge. Several columns. This could be landing craft mixed in." Landing craft. That was a different word entirely. A landing meant invasion. And an invasion force meant something worse. Destruction of their supply lines, their radio tower, their coastal batteries. Everything on the island had been built to hold on by a thread. And now that thread felt as if it might snap with the slightest touch. Ishimoto's jaw clenched. His mind raced. The Americans were bold, but this bold. Why here? Why now? But the ocean didn't care about logic. It offered only the shapes drifting across its low, quiet, patient. He scanned again. There were gaps between some shapes, unnatural ones. But the morning haze blurred the imperfections. And when a swell rolled through, the silhouettes rose and fell, like holes. Heavy holes. His heart thumped. He had seen American deception before, But never on this scale. Never with this strange confidence. Never with this many. He lowered the binoculars. Signal every artillery unit. Prepare for bombardment. All forward batteries are to take firing positions immediately. The island erupted into motion. Boots pounded over black sand. Breech blocks slammed shut. Spotters sprinted uphill with rangefinders bouncing against their chests. The air filled with shouted orders, curses, and the metallic clatter of guns being wheeled into place. Above it all, a distant gull screamed thin, sharp, almost mocking. Ishimoto wiped sweat from his palms. He didn't like the silence from the convoys. No radio chatter, no aircraft escort. Just drifting. Were the Americans trying something new? Or had the Japanese finally been out hot? Turned to his adjutant. Estimate their distance. 7.5 kilometers, sir, but they're closing with the tide. The adjutant swallowed. If those are transports, they'll be within landing range in 40 minutes. 40 minutes. 40 minutes before the fate of the island could be rewritten. Ishimoto took one last look through the lenses. The silhouettes continued their eerie approach, ghostly, unwavering. No wakes, no engine rumble. Just silent lines of dark shapes growing larger with every rising swell. His lips parted. Something felt wrong. Not about what he was seeing, about what he wasn't. And then, just as he lowered the binoculars again, a runner stumbled up the path, gasping, eyes wide with something worse than fear. "Commander," he choked. "We found one." One of the enemy vessels, washed onto the west shore. Ishimoto froze. "A transport?" The runner shook his head violently. "No, sir, it's..." He swallowed hard. "Sir, it's... barrel. A single oil drum. Black dent scraped. Floating on the surf, and behind it. The debris of a broken rope." Ishimoto felt his stomach pitch. A convoy made of barrels. A deception so crude it looped all the way back to genius. He stared at the horizon again, eyes narrowing, trying to force the silhouettes into truth. And suddenly he saw the pattern, saw the ropes, the gaps, the unnatural straightness of the lines. His breath caught. They had been fooled. But the island's guns were already primed. The men were already tense. The enemy, if the enemy was nearby, now knew the Japanese had taken the bait. Because if barrels were drifting in, what was hiding behind the distraction? Ishimoto spun toward the eastern cliffs. "Where are the real ships?" he whispered. And from far beyond the headland, muffled by distance but unmistakable, came the thunder of engines. Something big was coming. The sound grew first as a vibration, low, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat echoing through the stone beneath the island. The gunners paused. Spotters froze mid-stride. Even the gulls seemed to tilt their heads, catching the distant tremor. Lieutenant Commander Ishimoto turned toward the eastern horizon. Engines not imagined. Not misheard. Engines. Deep, confident, and approaching fast. The coastal wind shifted, carrying with it the unmistakable growl of diesel propulsion, not the sputtering of patrol boats, but something far heavier. Something that pushed water aside rather than skipped across its surface. For a moment no one spoke. Then a lookout near the ridge shouted, voice cracking, multiple silhouettes emerging as northeast. Ishimoto forced his legs to move, boots crunching over gritty volcanic sand as he climbed the embankment. The world narrowed to the rising edge of the sea, and then he saw them. Not the clumsy shapes of barrels, not the wavering shadows of a decoy, but real steel, real hulls. Gray giants breaking through haze like beasts rising from slumber. The actual American task force, destroyers sharp-bowed and predatory. 2 escort carriers, their decks glinting under the sun. Columns of landing craft weaving like sharks in formation. Behind it all, a lumbering silhouette with a superstructure tall enough to cut the horizon. A full invasion group, coming in perfect alignment with the timing of the barrel decoys. It hit him like ice water. The barrels weren't meant to trick their eyes. They were meant to fix their guns. Keep every Japanese battery pointed west while the real threat slid in from the east. A map to stroke, crude and brilliant. Ishimoto felt anger rise, but he forced it down. Anger did nothing. Orders did. He ripped the speaking tube from an operator's hand. All batteries shift fire. New coordinates vector, 081. Enemy ships approaching at full speed. The gun crews scrambled. Men threw their shoulders into wheels, swinging heavy barrels toward the new threat. Sandbags ripped open, spent shells rolled into trenches. Officers screamed distances and azimuths as they recalculated in a frenzy. But time was no longer theirs. The first American destroyer angled its bow toward the shoreline almost politely before. Its forward gun cracked like a hammer against the world. A shell streaked overhead. The shockwave hit the cliffs a second later, blowing black sand 20 meters skyward. Japanese crewmen dove instinctively, hands over helmets, ears ringing. Another whistle, another crash. The destroyers weren't probing. They were announcing themselves. Behind them, the carriers turned broadside slow, deliberate, and their decks came alive with motion. Tiny silhouettes scurried across the flat tops as aircraft were rolled forward, wings unlocking with mechanical snaps. One of Ishimoto's lieutenants gasped, "Sir? Sir? They're launching already." He didn't finish, because overhead a swarm of dots appeared, growing, widening, spreading their wings into formation. Dauntless dive bombers, Avenger torpedo planes, Hellcats circling above them like guardians. The sky itself was turning American. Ishimoto exhaled shakily. The deception was no longer a clever trick. It was a curtain. And behind it, the real performance had begun. He pushed his binoculars into the lieutenant's chest. "Take over spotting," he barked, going to the command post. He sprinted down the slope, nearly losing his footing as artillery thundered behind him. The ground trembled. Once, twice, then continuously like distant thunder swallowing itself. Inside the bunker, the air reeked of sweat and cordite. Men shouted over each other. Maps fluttered under chaotic hands. And the radio screamed with overlapping transmissions. Ishimoto slammed his palms onto the table. Silence. The room obeyed, only from shock. He drew a breath, steadying his voice as the walls shook again from an American broadside. "Gentlemen, the enemy used the barrels to bait our guns," he said. "The real invasion begins now. If we lose the batteries, we lose the island." He pointed 2-3 red-marked positions along the cliffs. "We hold these until the last man. Understood?" A chorus of affirmations, fear buried under duty. But above them, far above them, the growing roar of vengeance told the truth. The island was about to be hit from sea and sky. And somewhere out there, beyond the billowing spray and falling shell casings, the American landing craft were closing the gap with terrifying speed. 30 minutes, maybe less. Ishimoto felt the bunker vibrate harder as another carrier squadron passed overhead, the air trembling like a living thing. He whispered, almost too quietly for anyone to hear, "God help us." The barrels were only the beginning. The first warning wasn't sound, it was shadow. Long, sharp silhouettes gliding across the volcanic cliffs, too slender to be birds, too fast to be drifting clouds. Every man on the western batteries froze as the shapes passed over them, streaking like blades against the sun-bleached sand. Then the sound followed, a rising howl, high-pitched, predatory, like the scream of a diving hawk, multiplied by engines built for war. A gunner on Battery 2 looked up just as the world above him folded into a screaming metallic shape. Dive bombers. The cry was swallowed instantly by the roar of vengeance. 7 SBD Dauntlesses peeled downward from 10,000 feet, their split flaps black against the sky. Their dive angles were perfect 70, maybe 75 degrees, almost vertical. The sunlight flashing along their canopies as if to mark each plane as a falling spear. The Japanese gunners barely had time to swing their barrels skyward. The dauntless leader, flying an aircraft marked B-12, held his dive longer than seemed humanly possible. The altimeter spun. Wind hammered him. G-forces clawed at his ribs. 2,000 feet. 1,500. 1,000, he toggled the release. A 1,000-pound bomb dropped cleanly, tumbled once, then vanished behind the cliffline. A moment of silence. Then the whole western ridge erupted. The blast tore open the sand, shredding 2 trench lines and flipping a 75mm gun like it weighed nothing. And the Dauntlesses weren't alone. Behind them came the Avenger's big, dark torpedo bombers whose wings seemed to block out the sun. They flew low, skimming the waves before banking inland, their bomb bays yawning open like jaws ready to swallow the bunkers. One released a spread of fragmentation bombs, each casing rattling as it tumbled. They hit moments later. The shock was brutal, sharp, concussive pops that sent shards of steel whirring through the air like razor-edged hail. Gunners ducked. Officers shouted. Medics sprinted between craters, pulling the wounded behind sandbag walls that were rapidly turning into shredded cloth. The air itself became a weapon. Hot, windy, choking, filled with grit, smoke, and the metallic smell of ruptured earth. LTCMDR. Ishimoto burst from the bunker entrance, covering his face as sand whipped past him in violent sheets. The sky roared overhead again, this time with F-6F Hellcats strafing at treetop height there. 50 caliber guns stitching lines of fire across anything that moved. Dozens of Japanese soldiers dove for cover. One young private wasn't fast enough. A burst struck him across the back. He collapsed with a cry that was instantly drowned out by 2 more strafing passes. The anti-aircraft crews fired back, but they were outmatched. Their Type 96 25mm guns popped upward like angry wasps. Brass casings clattering at their feet, but their arcs were limited, and their aim thrown off by the smoke. Still they fought. One Hellcat banked too sharply, too low. 25mm burst caught its wingtip and fuel line. The aircraft snapped sideways, caught fire instantly, and spiraled down in a trail of oily smoke. It hit the western slope and vanished in a violent burst of flame. A tiny, momentary victory. But the sky was full of planes. Full of noise, full of death. And then the destroyers joined in. The USS Bailey, sitting 2,800 yards offshore, fired a full broadside. The shells ripped overhead with a sound like tearing sky, slamming into the cliffs in fiery bursts. The shockwaves hit the island like incoming earthquakes. Gun positions collapsed, roofs caved in. Ammunition crates detonated in chains of bright white flashes. Ishimoto stumbled as the ground shook under him. The batteries were dying. He grabbed his field phone, shouting into it as if sheer volume could hold the island together. All Western guns hold positions. Maintain counterfire on the destroyers. But fewer and fewer voices answered. One battery reported half its crew down, another reported its gun jammed, third said nothing at all. The sea in front of the island churned as American landing craft advanced behind a rolling curtain of smoke laid by their destroyers. Plumes of white phosphorus drifted across the waves like ghosts. "Sir?" a spotter cried out behind him. The enemy landing force, it's inside 1,500 yards. Too close. Far too close. The decoy barrels had done more than distract. They had bought the invasion force time. Every second the Japanese spent firing at shadows was a second the Americans spent closing the gap. Ishimoto swallowed hard. The sky pounded. The sea thundered. The cliffs burned. The landing craft kept coming. "Prepare infantry positions," he shouted. "We'll meet them at the shoreline." His men scrambled. But as he looked toward the surf, he saw something else. Something he hadn't expected. Dozens of American LVTs and Higgins boats were fanning out. But they weren't heading for the main beaches. They were splitting, redirecting, drifting toward the weaker, less defended southern side of the island. A second deception, a feint behind a feint. The barrels had drawn the guns. The air attack had broken the ridge. Now the landing forces were maneuvering toward the soft underbelly. Ishimoto felt the realization strike him like a physical blow. We've been outplayed at every step. Didn't he notice the tremor behind him until it grew into a rolling quake beneath his boots? A bomb. No, several. Falling. Close. Too close. He looked up just in time to see 3 Dauntlesses banking into another dive straight toward the command post. Everything else vanished in white heat.